Hello. My name is Nico, and today we're going to be talking about Markov chains, artificial intelligence, and the bad future. Um, a little disclaimer, I'm used to doing talks that are very compressed into like 10 or 15 minutes, so I'm going to really try not to race through. Something that is, at least for the middle portion, which is kind of a workshop, is a little bit dense, but without further ado, let's start. So, before we get into it, a brief breakdown of what to expect. Today, we will talk about the inspirations for this talk, my incremental typing game, You Are a Writer, Markov chains, of course, but then also how to generate text with Markov chains, why Markov chains are cool, LLMs and AI, and also the bad future. So let's get to it. So I can't continue before giving proper thanks to Jason Greenblatt, founder and designer at Freehold Games, which most recently made Caves of Cud. His talk, called Markov by Candlelight, went over the usage and implementation of generated text using Markov chains in Caves of Cud. And this talk wasn't just formative to my eventual implementation of Markov chains, but foundational. At the time that I was developing a Markov chain text generator, all of what I knew about Markov chains I learned from this talk. It's a great talk, and I highly recommend it. Secondly, I watch this astonishingly well-produced video essay on Suno AI, from which this talk's title is inspired. This video essay covers a massive amount of ground relating to the ethics and emotions surrounding AI tools, especially when used to create generative art. It is also a great watch, and I highly recommend it. But let's get to the topic at hand. Last year, I made this short-form incremental typing game called You Are a Writer. It is a fairly standard incremental clicker game, but instead of clicking, you are typing. And while the game starts out quite simple, typing out words to make a few cents, eventually you must contend with automation, your individuality as a writer, and of course, profitability as you endeavor to publish your first book. The game revolves around a central choice, whether to rely upon LLMs to automate the process or to take on the monumental task of typing it out yourself. For now, let's focus on a singular element of the game, the text generator that creates the strange sentences that you have to type. To randomly generate these sentences, I used Markov chains. Now, you may have no idea what a Markov chain is, or perhaps you do know what a Markov chain is, but you've never heard of its use in regards to text generation, or perhaps you know everything that there is to know about Markov chains. Regardless, we are going to learn about them. So there is some prerequisite knowledge. Thankfully, it's fairly straightforward and non-critical, and I am going to race through explaining these prerequisites, but don't worry, a surface level understanding of these things are just fine. So to start, we need to know what a corpus is. What a corpus is just a collection of written texts. This could be a few pages of text. It could be a whole book or a number of books. It could be the entire plain text contents of a website or even multiple websites. Essentially, it is just any amount of text. Then we need to know what a dictionary data structure is. A dictionary data structure is made up of keys and values. Each key is unique and has any number of values associated with it. Think of a dictionary of words, where the title comes from. There is only one instance of each word in a dictionary, but each word may have multiple definitions. Then we need to sort of know what an n-gram is. An n-gram is just a sequence of n items. In our case, this is words. You don't need to fully understand this now. Just lock away that we will learn about this a little bit later. So that's it. Now we're ready to learn about Markov chains. So the definition of a Markov chain is as follows. In probability theory and statistics, a Markov chain or Markov process is a stochastic process describing a sequence of possible events in which the probability of each event depends only on the state attained in the previous event. Like when I first read this definition, you might find it so complex that it is functionally meaningless. So let's try to understand Markov chains by actually creating one. But first we need a corpus, which is the text that we will use or be learned from to generate text later. Let's use this definition that we have here, just to keep things simple. Second, a Markov chain requires that we break down the text into n-grams, which, as we said in the last slide, is a sequence of items with the number of items determined by n. In this case, continuing to keep things simple, we are going to use an n-gram where n equals 1, also called a unigram. And this means that each n-gram very simply is just a single word. Now that we have our corpus and our n-gram definition sorted out, we can begin the process of creating a Markov chain. So to start, we would take the first word of a sentence as the prefix. In this case, it is the word in, and we would place that as a key in our dictionary, and then we would add the word probability as a value, which is just the word that is following that key. Then we would take the next word, probability, and make that a key, and then add the following word as a key as well. Then we would just keep doing this, incrementing through the entirety of the text, adding keys and values to our dictionary. And of course, where this gets interesting is when we get to a word for the second time. For example, the word occurs 3 times. And each time that we encounter it, we would add the following word as a value to that same dictionary entry. So in this case, the word is followed by the words Markov, stochastic, and sequence. The same goes for the word in, which is followed by which and the. The same goes for the word the, which is followed by probability, state, and previous. So once we've gone through the entirety of the text, we have our Markov chain. And with this Markov chain, we can generate text. So because we only have a corpus that's very, very small, it's only a single sentence, we only have 1 prefix and 1 suffix. So every single one of our sentences generated with this Markov chain will start with the word in and end with the word event. So it won't generate anything particularly interesting, but let's give it a try to see the sort of like vibe of what a Markov chain would generate. So to start, we have in, we sort of walk through until we get to statistics. No, we get to which is followed by any of these 3 choices, Markov, stochastic, or sequence. And then we just sort of walk through, occasionally reaching points where we randomly branch to 2 or 3 words. We make those choices and we end up with a sentence that doesn't make any sense. In probability theory and statistics, a sequence of possible events in the previous event. But now we have this Markov chain, and let's imagine that we expand it to one with, one of the keys is the word it. And in this corpus, the word it only has the following 2 words as values. Now let's imagine if the corpus was a lot larger, and there were hundreds, maybe even thousands of options that might follow the word it, since we'd be pulling from a much larger corpus. And then imagine, what if we sorted those values by how probable the next word might be? And then imagine if we increased the order of our n-gram, since our corpus is so large that we can sort of be looking backwards as well as forwards, and being a little bit more specific with the way that sentences are formed. And then imagine that we based some of these weights off of a prompt. And then imagine that we secured billions of dollars in venture capital, and then you'd be an LLM. Sort of functionally. Now, this evolution then would not be a Markov process, because a Markov chain by definition will predict and create an event based on the state of the previous event alone. Once you introduce other influences, most notably a prompt and all of the previous tokens within a generated response, and use it to predict the next event, you are distinctly not a Markov chain. The text generator that I created for URWriter is very much a Markov chain text generator. Because of the nature of a Markov chain, sentences can run on for dozens, in fact, sort of theoretically infinite, but infinitely unlikely, of words. And the generated text often winds in and out of being grammatically correct and regularly is total nonsense. That being said, I consider the jankiness of my Markov chain text generator a feature and not a bug. Most obviously because the game is simply more fun and challenging when the next word is unpredictable. In fact, the text generator's tendency to sort of dance in and out of making sense adds this interesting dynamic challenge as you are lured into a false sense of security by a string of well put together words, only increasing your chances of rushing into a mistake when the generator takes a sharp turn into the weird and nonsensical. I love the way that this player describes the game as a transcription trainer. The player's progression, though aided by in-game external factors, has to be somewhat internal, as the player disciplines themselves to be meticulous and deliberate and not rely upon their previous knowledge of sentence structure. Something that would increase the correctness of my text generator is compiling and generating based on probabilities in the chain, which does still fall under the definition of a Markov process. This could be as simple as sorting and weighing the values associated with the key based on their adjacent frequency in the corpus. I prototyped this, but determined not to pursue it because I have no interest in creating a text generator that is accurate. I intentionally used a relatively small handwritten corpus and compiled the corpus into unigrams like the example that we did in this presentation. And this makes the generated text so much more chaotic and less predictable, which in this case is perfect. LLMs, on the other hand, are intensely probabilistic. They operate off of a corpus which is literally incomprehensible to humans. The amount of data that GPT-3, which mind you is now half a decade old, would take over 2,000 years for the average adult reader to consume. And these LLMs, commonly and colloquially referred to as artificial intelligence or AI, will thusly, in response to your prompt, give you the most likely answer. Not the most interesting, and even maybe kind of alarmingly, not even the most correct, but the most likely. This technology has been popularly implemented in many various AI agents of the modern age, agents such as ChatGPT or Claude or Gemini. When compared to my rudimentary text generator, these LLMs seem incredibly sophisticated. They are responsive, they're chock full of information, and they're programmed with this personality, not entirely unlike an extremely kind person who was hit really hard in the head. And then like that blunt force trauma made an already very agreeable person extremely more agreeable. But the primary difference between my text generator and these agentic text generators is that these programs are not seen as text generators. They're seen as agents, something that the user can have conversations with, can delegate tasks to, or even seek guidance from. Recent research has started to poke some holes in the corporate promise of AI, that these agents will transform the workforce and lead to a golden age of, rich tech oligarchs being even richer. Studies have shown that businesses that invest really heavily in AI are struggling to see a return in their investment. And that AI often leads to a perceived sense of efficiency that, when investigated, can sometimes result in lesser productivity. And of course, that the data centers required to run this technology at the massive scale that these corporations are pushing is understandably terrible for the environment. Of course, these are recent studies, and as anyone in tech would likely tell you, it's only going to get better. And yes, the technology will probably improve. When looking at internal reports from AI companies like Anthropic, you'll see reports on exponential productivity gains with really astounding metrics, like 8 times as much code per day than in 2024, or that more than 80% of the code that Anthropic merges into their code base was authored by Claude. And though this is, of course, startlingly biased reporting, there is at least some element of truth to this. And even so, in this really, really strange, semi-formal pseudo-blog released by Anthropic called When AI Builds Itself, which is half spent on singing the praises of AI development and half spent on fear-mongering about the possibility of a dark future in which the AI does become capable of recursive self-development. They included this quote from an anonymous employee, which I am going to read in full because I think that it's crazy that Anthropic published this quote itself. The quote is as follows. "On days where everything works well, I can't help but think nothing I do matters. Everything is automated and better and faster than I will ever be. And then there are days where everything breaks and I don't understand why, and I realize I have no idea what I've been up to anymore." I find it mostly scary that Anthropic, a leader in the AI field, fearlessly acknowledges that their technology is leading to skill deterioration and a sense of purposelessness in their own employees. But regardless, it is this very feeling of helplessness and disassociation that I was chasing after in You Are a Writer. An inevitability that if you choose to automate, that you will eventually end up sitting there watching the books write themselves. And it's this deterioration that I find myself so concerned with, as it seems as if more and more people are pursuing shortcuts in their craft, as you are often incentivized to do in video games. When playing video games, it's easy to ignore the implications of your actions and push forward in the name of progress. This dynamic is even more common in incremental games, games that encourage you to forget what happens to the rest of the world as you expand your industrious cookie clicking or paperclip making empire. But we must contend with the world that we live in, because we live in it and it's not a video game. And even still, as relevant as the issues that I mentioned before, these issues of efficiency, the environment, the displacement of labor, that will definitely be imminent if AI continues on its current trend. The technology could feasibly actually become profitable. It could actually become effective, and it could actually become efficient. But despite the feasibility of these things, only one of these is actually likely when considering the priorities of corporate capitalism. So, are we passengers in an incremental game piloted by tech oligarchs and warmongering neoliberal fascists? And like most incremental games, are we headed towards this bad future, the one where the world is consumed by the insatiable appetite of capitalism? I think that it's easiest to point out the incredibly dire direction that it seems that the world is headed, and perhaps it would be easiest to end this talk on a note of doom and gloom, because it does feel as if this bad future is not just inevitable, but it's like right there on the horizon. But it is also easy to refuse. And so for this talk, at least, I'm going to refuse to succumb to the temptation to wallow in the frightening gloom of AI doomerism. And I'm going to refuse to engage with AI, especially in the pursuit of creating art, a process of creation that I love dearly. And I refuse to end on a dour note. And like Dr. Cottom, I think that this refusal is actually hopeful and expansive. Making things has always been my method of coping. That's why I made You Are a Writer, and I am constantly impressed, amused, and astounded by the conversations had through art about AI. This screen grab is from the website Your AI Slop Bores Me, where you can ask questions as a human, and then you can also LARP as an AI. I really recommend it. It's fantastic. And perhaps the most striking thing about this website is that you know that the response that you're going to get from the AI agent, someone LARPing as an AI agent, is truly singular and truly human. Something that is functionally impossible functionally impossible when you prompt an LLM because of the nature of their generated response. And speaking of generated responses, to conclude, perhaps in an effort to bring us full circle to the singular and compelling nature of the text created by a quaint little Markov chain text generator, and perhaps to urge you to create something like this of your own that is a critique of, a conversation with this bad future that might be on the horizon. I've compiled some lines of text generated in You Are a Writer into a short poem. These are all made in-game, and they're all generated by the Markov chain. I will read it for you now. Games have had a drink. Games have always spinning. This is in dark times. It is normal in life. You mustn't overwater your face. Truly, my life. Thank you. If you have any questions, I can answer them. I do feel like I want to maybe precede any questions that I may have presented myself as someone who's really learned in the intricacies of AI. I'm a two-time fine arts pursuer. And so the intricacies of how LLMs actually work, it's a very surface level understanding, but I can attempt to answer any questions if you have some about LLMs. Certainly questions about Markov chains.
Can you explain what it would mean to have a higher n-gram in a Markov chain for text?
It's essentially just each one of those tokens would be multiple words, where n would be the number of words that you include in it. And so you would package what's a good example of this? Instead of having games be its own n-gram or a unigram, you would have games have, and then following that would be had a. And so you're able to contain a little bit more grammar in those, because as you notice with a unigram Markov chain, you're only looking at the single word that happens before or the single word that happens after, which means that you escape grammar extremely easily. So if you had an n-gram of where n equals 6, then you would only be able to pair things together 6 words in sequence that are followed by another 6 words in sequence, which would actually likely break the Markov chain pretty easily, because there are a lot of sentences that have fewer than 6 words. A good question. We love an n-gram. Yeah.
Yes, it seems like a lot of the problems associated with LLMs is that they're centralized in huge data centers owned by wealthy corporations. Is there any possibility that we will, in the future, be able to run LLMs entirely locally on our PCs, whereas Markov chain is the closest we're ever going to get?
No, actually, now you can run LLMs locally. The issue really is the size of the LLMs. When you look at something like Claude or Gemini or any of the GPTs, the issue is that there are trillions of data points. They actually do the inverse of what Markov chains do, and they tokenize within the words. So they're taking multiple tokens per word, which means that those are multiple data points per word, and then ingesting the entire existing universe of textual data that's been created by humans. And so of course that will take 7,000 acres in middle America to create, however many data centers. Yeah, so you could feasibly run an LLM locally. There are a lot of people who sort of parade around that they made their own model when they're using GPT, and then they're training GPT off of their text. And I do want to be super clear that that is not making your own model. You are still building off of the back of billions of, maybe trillions of data points. Honestly, the reason why I would advocate for Markov chains is never for accuracy. And it's never for the ability of something that an LLM could do. It's always because you can tell. It's incontrovertible that I made this weird Markov chain. And it's because I wrote the corpus. I wrote every single word in this corpus. And so the things that it generates, even this, where I would never write this poem, I could never write this poem. But my fingerprints are still on it. When you prompt an LLM, there are like billions of fingerprints on it, and it has no idea what those fingerprints are. Yeah.
I wonder if you could talk a little bit more about your corpus and how you developed it. I'm always interested in how someone thinks about how the corpus sort of contributes to the artistry of something like this.
Yeah, for You Are a Writer, it was just 10 pages, broken up into two different flavors, two different 5-page flavors. So when you start writing the book, you like stop becoming a contract writer and you start writing the book that you want to write. It takes from like a fantasy corpus, like a sort of like using some fantasy words that are like harder to write out. And as you write more words, the corpus expands. So it starts as just a 1-page corpus that becomes a 2-page corpus, 3, 4, and then it caps out at 5. I should have included like an excerpt from the corpus because it's unhinged. It's just me like stream of consciousness, like pumping words into a Google document and then going back and revising it so that there is some diversity. Like I did try to make sure that I wasn't leaning too hard into particular patterns or that I was having particular words that were only ever followed up by another one. So that there was some kind of randomness and that it could sort of wind in and out of almost any word. That's what I was trying to look for. So that it would be more chaotic, actually, not more put together. Yeah.
Yeah, just kind of actually following up on that, I do a lot of research about as an editor, writing primarily. And what's always interested me is that virtually all of what we associate with AI is not actually from the model. It's from like after the fact, like tuning of it or reinforcement learning of it, just basically to fire it out. In many cases, randomness, or in many cases, weirdness. And so you mentioned, so I was wondering if you could kind of like speak more about that, like if there were any. You mentioned just putting words into a Google document, but any like particular directions that you were going in terms of voice, because like voice will emerge no matter what, but it sounds like there might be more.
Yeah, so the two different corpi that you're swapping between are when you elect to do contract writing, which would be like you writing like blog posts or reviews or anything. And so that has much more like there's like thrown in some stuff in there that's about like the stock market or about like the international economy or about like warfare abroad. And then when you're writing the book, it's all set in this sort of like weird fantasy realm. And so the voices there were meant to be very different and intentional, that you would be able to sense that difference when you swapped back and forth between writing your book and then like writing for money on the side. An important or an interesting thing that you mentioned, which I think is important to note, is that it's not just that LLMs are tuned after the fact to be like more accurate and to give you more factual responses. They're also tuned in the other direction. They're tuned in order to sound more human, to take less likely options. And that's part of the reason why they hallucinate court cases and why they will often tell you that strawberry has like 6 R's or whatever the thing is. Yeah. I hope that answers your question. I'm not sure if it did. Yeah.
Yeah, it seems like with your work, you're really embracing like the surrealism of kind of bad AI and the janky, and that makes what makes it kind of fun. But obviously, with the large language model, the output is the coherent sentence that makes sense. Maybe it's not fast, but it breaks sense, it's coherent sense. Do you think there is any? I know the IF community has kind of debated this, and I'm just curious about your opinion. Do you think there is any artistic potential in large language models to create something interesting, or is it just too darn generic?
I'm trying to think of a more nuanced answer than no. But yeah, I would say typically, or really in my heart of hearts, I feel that it's not about the genericness of the text, because your writing could be generic and I could find it beautiful. And like I regularly, I will watch generic movies and I find myself enjoying them. The issue is that there's like functionally no meaning that you can extract from something created by an LLM. And it's because, or it's not only because it's been cobbled together from billions of data points amongst like all this text in the universe, but it's also because it really is just giving you the thing that is most probable, which I think is maybe the worst possible result. And it's part of the reason why I'm giving this talk about a text generator that is bad, because I think that the text generator that is bad is more interesting. Yeah. I don't know what the order is. Maybe we'll go from back to front. So in the back.
Hi, I really appreciate this project. I spend a lot of time in creative tech spaces where it's like tech industry adjacent people making creative work. And something I notice a lot is like sometimes make AI critical projects, but also play into the system by using the common AI tools themselves. And that's something I've been trying to grapple with. So I really like projects that do the critical AI stuff, but seek alternatives in the process. I'm curious if you have shown this work or other work where have dialogue with more like tech world adjacent people, or even like someone not in tech world, but like is really pro AI, and like what that process of sharing this work is like, and has it changed their opinion at all, or made them reconsider?
A really interesting question. I have not repeated any of the questions that have been said so far, but I'm going to repeat this one. The question is what have any like tech spaces or tech people, how have they responded to my work? Have I showcased that work to them? What did they think about it? Did it change their mind? And the answer is I've had so many conversations with tech people about this. I had some of the like worst conversations of my life at GDC, talking to people in San Francisco about AI, which is sort of like a game, maybe like a Fadian game in and of itself, where you're trying to sort of like navigate a social situation where you don't want to tell someone that the thing that they're doing you find like weird and abhorrent. But also, like, you can't do that. You can't just like crush someone's dreams right in front of them. And also, they won't let you. They'll fight back so hard, tooth and nail. But I have had some very nuanced discussions with people, and I think that most of that comes from people like that Anthropic employee, right? They're terrified too. They're terrified for maybe like a different reason, which is that they won't be able to live like a life of comfort, and they're not really worried about the collapse of like culture and people being able to like live a life where they are fulfilled by the art that they're making, and also there is like fulfilling art that is being created in the world. Instead, they're worried that their job won't exist anymore, which is also valid and also relevant. The issue, I think, is that they don't refuse, and they maybe never will. They do buy into almost every single person who I've talked to who is currently working in tech at a company that utilizes AI in some form. They do see it as the sort of the paradox, right? Which is the paradox that a lot of writers are being pushed up against, that a lot of game developers are being pushed up against, which is that their job, their livelihood is mandating that they use this thing that they are opposed to. And I don't have an answer to that, right? Because refusal is really easy for me to advocate for right now when like my job is not on the line for them. So even though I think that like there's much less nuance than I think a lot of people would like to have around AI, and I would wish that it was easy to just say no flat, like I presented today. It is very difficult. And I don't think that minds are really being or thoughts are being changed so much as maybe people are thinking about a different future, a future that doesn't necessarily hinge upon the massive amounts of money that AI is making now. Yeah.
So I'm kind of curious, for practically what you mean this potential that partially because as far as I'm concerned, a lot of these things love to be invisible whenever they're selling. Like Instagram is basically just something where it's effectively a pretty big privacy minding piece of technology, but it's invisible because it's presented with the veneer of, hey, like, share your life, like let's share the moments in your life, like with everybody. But with AI, like you basically get this interesting thing where almost every service that doesn't really have any business showing AI just pops up in a little corner. Hey, it's under an AHR. Like, what's the worst that can happen? And we're basically seeing a pretty interesting, I feel almost even like overcorrection in terms of the public perception being very anti like all of this. So I think like from my personal perspective, it kind of feels like there's actually a limit in terms of how much the public can respond to AI, to the point where you might actually have a more fascistic tendency by these companies or governments to shut it down. So I'm kind of curious what yours are.
So the question is my take on AI adoption by companies oftentimes being surface level, and what my vision of this bad future really is. And I think that these are really great points, right? And part of the thing that I think is a part of my opinion about the way that things are going is that so many companies are jumping onto a bandwagon that we've seen crash headfirst into a brick wall time and time again over the past couple decades, maybe all time, like Bitcoin or like VR maybe or AR, where it's like they see something that is new and fanciful and they say, we're going to implement this in a way that does not really sacrifice anything. But we get to call ourselves an AI company. And in other cases, we have like a shoe company that's like, I'm going to become an AI company. And so some of it I think is just like trendy, right? It's like trendy tech that they want to adopt. But the bad future that I envision is one where none of the promises are kept, right? Because I don't think the promises being kept by these corporate entities is the problem. I don't trust that Anthropic will be able to deliver on self-improving recursive development. And I do think that blog post is purely political. It's about AI regulation, and it's not about any sort of public safety or security. And so the bad future that I am envisioning is just the enshittification of the world, right? Because I don't think that AI will ever get to the point. We've hit the S curve, right? Where all of human data that has been made over the past, or like digital data that has been made over the past decades, is now in those AI. And so we have been passengers on the exponential part of this S curve. And a lot of tech people will project forward that it keeps going up, right? And then the ones who believe in recursive self-development think that it'll become a line that is just shooting to the moon into infinity, and that Skynet will be made, and then we'll be enslaved. Which that's a bad future that I actually don't envision. I just envision a world where most companies mandate the use of AI and people's critical thinking deteriorate, and that because it's easiest to come after subjectivity, AI is going to be used by people who are foreign or disassociated with creativity to try to ape the things that people who really desire and are fulfilled by art. They're going to attempt to do that, and they're going to attempt to profit off of it. And unfortunately, based off of the world that I have seen throughout my life, they might be successful at that. And so I would refuse. Yeah.
I got like to join in the dialogue as somebody who has input in both camps. I have zero interest in using generative AI as a computer writer, but I have a day job as a programmer. And I work for state government, so there is a little bit of public interest also in play here. My on the in the trenches experience is that when it comes to coding, and I think a lot of the reason why it's taken off in the coding sector is because often the most likely is good enough, but to get it to one, integrate with other things, or two, to get it to actually do what you want it to do, you still have to have that creative and experienced direction, and you still have to have that critical thinking. And it's like if you find yourself in a position that where you're the management's pushing the AI tools on you, the thing you actually don't want to surrender is that critical thinking.
Yeah, exactly. And the unfortunate thing, I think, is that all of these jobs that the tech world or like AI enthusiasts are essentially telling us, you get no fulfillment out of this, right? So just let AI do it. But so many people are fulfilled by their jobs, by the labor that they do. And right now it's just the beginning, right? And that critical thinking that a lot of people that is slowly being sort of like chipped away, that I worry about that because I enjoy coding, right? Like I do enjoy doing it. Maybe I wouldn't enjoy doing it at a government job. I don't know how you feel about your profession.
Have come to enjoy some aspects of it.
Yeah.
I'm mostly more of an analyst and a designer than a coder.
Right.
But that's not everyone. I understand that. I'm not going to say to anyone, if you don't like to use it, I'm not going to try to convince you otherwise.
Yeah, of course. One more question. These have been pretty non-controversial. If someone wants to hit me with a really controversial one. Okay. All right, well, thank you so much, everyone.